Welcome to In Conversation. I'm your host, Steve Iverson. Today we have with us Matthew Cohen, who is running for the state rep seat here in Massachusetts that's being vacated by Jay Kaufman because he's retiring. And he's going to tell us why he's running and what he'd like to accomplish. So thank you for coming on, Matthew.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a
Pleasure
pleasure to
being
be here. Yeah, thanks so much.
So let me start with the most important question. Could you tell us a bit about why you decided to run?
Absolutely. It is a very important question, I would agree. And, you know, it's always a tough decision when you want to run, you know, put yourself out there and do this. But I think there really, for me, are a few reasons I wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. One, honestly, is, you know, I saw this sort of inspiring wave that arose in 2016, sort of new young people who were getting involved and people who'd never really run for office before. And I thought this seems a good step for what we've just been through in this country, and I want to be a part of that. You know, I want to help be this sort of new wave, this set of new blood, these new sort of ways of doing things we haven't done before. And I think in my case, you know, it's a particularly good fit because I've spent virtually all of my life learning about or working in government or some aspect of government. So my first job actually was in the town manager's office here in Lexington. Oh. And I was a sort of management intern was the official title, and Massport actually gave me a grant at the request of the town to come in and do it. And it was a great experience. I was under Rick White at that time, who was the town manager. And
I remember when he was town manager.
Yeah, I liked him a lot, actually. He was very nice to me, so he was a good guy. But it gave me a great sense of how towns work, you know, what it takes to really run them. And I also got to see what happens when the state passes laws that impact local communities and what that real impact is on those communities. From there, actually, I interned in Senator Kennedy's office in between high school and college. I was in his Boston office doing both foreign and domestic policy, and that was a great experience to see a little bit of the federal level. Mm-hmm. Went to college, Brandeis University, studied and majored in politics, actually. Everyone calls it something different.
Sometimes it's political science.
Yeah, that'll be one of the later ones I got, yeah. So I had politics and sociology at Brandeis. Mm-hmm. Went from there to work for the Massachusetts Democratic Party, where I got to work as a staffer, and all of us there, from the lowest to the highest, there were only a few of us. So it was really sort of a jack of all trades kind of setup and situation, which was kind of fun to get to see all the different levels on which the party works. From there, went to the State House. That helped me get into there, and I worked for over 7 years as a research and budget director at the Committee on Mental Health and Substance Abuse, and then also in the sort of district offices. That's still at the State House, but doing district concerns for two representatives, Ruth Balzer in Newton and Liz Malia in Jamaica Plain, and wonderful to work for. I really liked both of them a great deal. And the job was amazing. You really got to see firsthand how you make policy, how you go about working on the budget, what it really takes to draft a bill that's going to pass. It's really very different than having worked at either that local or that sort of federal level. Each level is very different, and I found very quickly the skills at one didn't necessarily help me as I went to any of these other jobs. So
state level government is its own beast.
It is definitely its own beast. It's a strange beast, but I personally grew to really love it during my time there. You know, when you pass, you know, the first thing I ever worked on was a veterans mental health care legislation, expanding access to treatment. And amazingly, it passed, and it was an incredible feeling when you stood there. And, you know, we had a lot of other achievements during my time there, and a lot of fights on the budget. You know, those long night budget week where you're there from, you know, noon to midnight, 2 a.m., depending how far it goes, and you're just stuck there that entire time. So, you know, I guess I was inspired. And from there, actually, I then decided it was time I wanted some more education while at the State House, got a master's degree in government from Harvard, working nights while I was there. And at the end of that time, figured, you know, I want a little more education. So I actually left the State House, went to Northeastern, and just finished a PhD in political science. Actually, graduated just a few days ago, which was a lot of fun.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It was a good experience. And I studied political science there. So I guess when politics, government, political science, showing all the range of what, it's all the same stuff, but everyone likes to call it little differences. So yeah, so I just finished that, and I thought, you know, it was time I wanted to give back to my community. You know, I feel like everyone has their own skills. Everyone has their own sort of way to give back. And for me, it is policy. It is government. That's what I know how to do better than sort of anything else. And I got a lot out of being here in Lexington. I grew up, born and raised here. My kids, actually, my daughter who's 8 and my son who's 4 will go to all the same schools, Bowman to Clark to LHS.
My kids took the same path.
Oh, did they really?
Bowman, Clark, LHS, yeah.
Great schools.
All the way through. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, it's a good set of schools. I loved going to those. It was a great time. And they're having fun too, or at least my daughter is. My son's still too young, but
Okay.
when he goes there, hopefully he will too. So she's having a blast. But no, I really wanted to give back
Okay.
to this community. It was a way to do it, and I wanted to show my kids this mattered. If nothing else out of all this, it's been a success because my daughter has already seen it. She's collected, when you go out collecting those signatures around our house with her friends, she's gone around with a sign-up sheet, a signature sheet that says, Brianna Cohen for president. And she's collected signatures for herself, saying she's going to be the first female president of the United States.
Nice.
I keep telling her, I hope that isn't true, that we'll get one before that.
Right.
But, it's been worthwhile simply to see her sort of interest and now growing love for this.
How old is
kind
she
of
now?
stuff. So she's 8.
8.
So yeah, but 26 years before she's even eligible. So
Right.
hopefully we'll get one before that.
She doesn't have to rush into it.
That is true.
Let me ask you, what were your impressions of, you said you worked in Senator Kennedy's office.
I did, yes, as an intern there.
Yeah. What were your impressions of Senator Kennedy? How did you find him? What did you think of him?
So I've always been a big fan. Honestly, one of my sort of political heroes, one of the reasons I got into this, one of my favorite political memories actually was getting to go to the Kennedy compound while I was an intern, still in high school, and it was a pretty big event. So he would have no idea who I was. I didn't get to know him very well during this time.
Sure.
So I met him, I think, only 3 times in my life. So once at that job and twice outside of it. So I think one was a book signing, but he walks over, and I sort of thought, I'm going for it. And when I walked over, introduced myself, said what a hero he was of mine, and he got this giant grin on his face, and he threw his arm around me and said, "Someone come grab a camera and take a picture." So I'm still hanging on my wall in my office back home of the picture I have with Senator Kennedy. But I was really inspired, really by what he did. He wasn't one who just said, "Oh, ideology is all that matters." He said, "Let's take a look at what works." And that's what's really important to me. When I went to make policy at the State House, everyone has their guiding ideology. Everyone has what they would like to be true. But it's very important that people recognize when it isn't. And, he didn't always do that either, and none of us always do.
Right.
But he, in general, he really focused on what is going to work in this situation. And that's very important to me. So that was one of my main takeaways from him is, do what works. Don't do what you want to be true. And I think that's something I wish, honestly, both parties would learn a bit more of. So yeah.
Even Ronald Reagan was on good terms with Tip O'Neill.
Absolutely.
Was willing to work with him.
Yeah, in my time at the State House, I worked with Republicans. I worked with Republican administrations while I was there, Democrat and Republican, from Romney to Patrick. I got to work with both of them. So it was you can work with anyone if you're willing to, if both sides are willing.
Right.
And I had good experiences with that while there.
Have you ever had an opportunity to meet Jay Kaufman, who has the job that you want?
Many times, actually.
Okay.
So when I was in high school, I worked on his first campaign.
Oh.
So I was one of the volunteers. I went door to door for him, stuffed envelopes, the old-fashioned way.
First campaign, this would have been almost 25 years ago?
Yep, 24 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was in high school then.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was great to get to know him.
You worked on his campaign, went door to door.
Yep, so my mother was one of the leaders of the campaign, so one of the campaign managers. So yeah, we know him well. He's a good man. And actually my office at the State House, so the committee I worked for and the committee he ran, Revenue Committee, for a long time were next door to one another. So I got to run into him in the halls from time to time. He helped me get that job. So he put in a good word with, at the time it was Representative Ruth Balzer who had she was the chair. And he put in a good word for me. So I'm very grateful to him for that, helped me get that position.
Is there anything in particular he did over the years that you admire or think is especially valuable? Any of his legislative achievements or other activities?
Absolutely. So a bunch, really. I think there's a lot of good things he's done. He's been a very responsible sort of steward with the budget. He's handled revenue legislation very well. Making sure that we cover important things and we get things that need to be done without going too far, without pushing over the limits of what we can afford to do. I've admired what he's done. He's done a lot for the environment. He's been engaged with environmental causes, and that I think is critical. No other policy matters if there's nowhere to live.
It's a good point.
Yeah, I think
it's a good point. And we can't ruin this particular planet because there aren't any others to go to.
Exactly. Yeah. At least not yet.
Right.
I don't know about you, but I don't know if you want to go to Mars. It's too cold. Yeah.
My thought is that if we're going to consider going to Mars as an alternative to here, if in the case that we ruin it, what's to keep us from ruining Mars? We need to just get it right here.
Totally agree, yes.
But that's an aside.
Yeah, no, but I'm with you, yeah. It's an important point, yeah. But, yeah, I admire what he's done in that regard. He's been a champion for the METCO program, and I supported growing up. I had a number of friends from the METCO program. Some I'm still in contact with, so I'm glad he keeps fighting for it. I want my kids to have that same experience with that program. I think it's an important one. People to increase diversity in the schools, I think, is a valuable thing to show people. Right. We are all human. It's important to actually meet people from other groups.
Right, and Lexington is a fortunate town. On the whole, not completely, but on average, it's affluent. It's well educated. Yeah. People growing up here, if they didn't have opportunities like MEDCO or other types of programs, might only see people sort of like themselves until they go off to college.
Absolutely, and that isn't the right way to do it, especially when children are young. It's important to really have them have those experiences so that they can have a better sense of the world, a sense that it's bigger than just what you see in front of you. And I think that's what education's for. It's critical in life to form those experiences so we can learn to get along with everybody as best we can.
Right.
So, yeah.
What do you think? What do you think of the Lexington school system as a whole?
It's outstanding. It's they've had those studies that show it's school performance in Lexington's off the chart in that regard. It's a wonderful program and system. To me, the biggest issue obviously is overcrowding. And as state representative, honestly, there is only so much that I can really do about that. A lot of that is simply a local level, and that's one thing I'll always be honest about. We do have limits on our power, and even in that regard, there isn't much we can do. But one thing that I think is particularly important there is really that everyone else have this same opportunity. Lexington is doing great. The schools are fantastic. The town is doing very well. Not every community has access to really high quality education, and that's a major problem, honestly, for everyone. Because if you don't have people who don't get that quality education, start off at a disadvantage. If we can boost the quality of education for all students in the Commonwealth, it's actually a win for everybody, and it makes us live up to our name, the Commonwealth. We are here to help one another. So I would like to see the state sort of a readjustment of things like Chapter 70, the Chapter 70 funding for schools. Readjusting that, I think, is important so that every community can benefit far more and every student can have those opportunities that they need.
Tell us about Chapter 70.
So it's a funding formula that the state uses in order to determine essentially which communities will get money from the state to help their programs. So, in communities where there's fewer houses or lower income, their state will provide additional funds to the municipality, be it town or city, in order to help improve education there. And a lot of cities, particularly places like Boston, that are highly diverse, that don't have an income tax, don't have a large property tax base, well, they lose out in education. And the way the system's set up now, they're actually losing out a lot.
Because most of the funding for schools in Massachusetts is local property taxes.
Yep, that is correct. And so this helps sort of fill gaps within that. But it doesn't necessarily enough. So things like the Fair Share Amendment, as it's called, the idea to raise taxes on people, very slightly on people making over $1 million. Well, the current proposal is that much of that money will go to education across the Commonwealth. And I think that's a sensible program. I think it's important to find that extra revenue so that we can help these schools, so we can help them do better. And these students can have the opportunity that they sort of all deserve. In the end, it'll actually increase our tax base if we do this. Because if we properly fund education, people will be more productive. They'll be able to be engaged in higher income work, and it will mean more taxes for the Commonwealth. So to me, it may not pay for itself, but it's an obvious thing to do that will help us in the long run, I believe.
No, that sounds right to me as well, for what it's worth. People who are educated can often get jobs that pay more.
Absolutely. And I think it's, to that point, even bigger. Not everyone wants to go the traditional academic route. That's fine. We need better vocational schools. We need improved access to them. So here in Lexington, we're very lucky. We have an excellent vocational high school.
Minuteman
Regional. Yep, it's an excellent school. And it actually is not full. There's space for additional students. In many vocational schools, that is not the case. They're full. They're at capacity or overflowing. And additional funds should be expended to help these vocational schools so that more people can have access to that if they don't want to take that traditional academic path. That's an important thing to fund as well. And helping people with college is important so that people can go. If they have earned their way in and they want to go, people should be able to afford to go to a state-owned university or college.
The state school system, over the years, from what I hear, has become slightly more challenging financially for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
I think it has to do with the fact that not so much tuition, but fees and other things have been going up. And it's harder for people to pay for it than it was at one time.
Absolutely. I think that's unfortunate. I think if we could, it's hard to create a program that would address that exactly, but I think if we could implement some sort of, for people who can't afford this, who struggle with these fees, who struggle with this tuition, to make it free for them to go. And things like the Fair Share Amendment, things like that will help provide that money. That will make it possible for people to get the education. Because again, that's going to improve their future earning potential, which is actually going to improve the tax base. So
that's a good point.
It again, may not be revenue neutral, but it is a worthwhile thing, both to improve people's lives and because it will end up boosting tax revenue in all likelihood.
Well, education is an investment, not a cost.
Absolutely.
Right.
I agree. Yes.
There's been some talk about making community colleges in Massachusetts free, I believe. I take it you might support that.
Yeah, so for me, I think it needs to be a little more nuanced, to be honest. I don't think, if you are making $1 million a year or your parents are making $1 million a year and are willing to pay to help you, maybe you don't need it to be free. And because we have limited resources, and I think it's important that people do their part, that people are willing to pay for what they want and the services that they desire. And if you can't, well, it's a different issue. And I believe that no one should be denied access to education because they can't afford to go. And that includes college education. And I think that is a worthwhile proposal and something I would definitely I'd like to see the actual proposal. How are we going to pay for this? But I'm very much in favor of that ideal and very much in favor of helping everyone go to college. Right?
Okay. Any other topics or areas where you think you might like to do some work if you were to become our state rep? What particularly interests you besides education?
Absolutely. So, in part, I'm a pragmatist. I believe you face the problem that's in front of you, and we won't know what that problem is right until the sort of moment it's there.
Right.
So my belief is always be open to facing whatever's there. Again, don't get stuck in sort of this is what I need to do. This is the only thing that matters. My ideology comes before all else. Sometimes you got to face whatever that problem is, and you may have to do something you don't like. And I've seen it many times at the State House where we had to make compromises we did not want to make, but had to do it anyway. And so my first goal would be to see simply what needs to be done at this moment. But in a perfect world, I think there are really a few things I'd really like to work on. And one of the big ones is really making sure that people are paid their fair wage. A big issue for a lot of this stuff is that a lot of jobs, especially sort of jobs in, say, in construction or your union jobs. Well, there are some people who try to undercut those union positions, try to sneak in with low bids on contracts because they use either undocumented workers, or they simply don't pay their people on time, or they pay them less, they withhold wages, sometimes they don't pay them at all. And I would like to address that problem, make it so that people who work hard get fair pay. Make sure we do increase the minimum wage. $15 an hour is what's considered the living wage at the moment, but it won't be the moment you pass it because cost of living and inflation will immediately bite into it.
Right.
So I would like to peg that to some sort of setup for either inflation or a basket of sort of cost of living, some sort of setup there that we could look at again, so we don't have to keep fighting the same ridiculous battle over and over again.
Which is time consuming. And,
Absolutely.
I think the world today changes so quickly that sometimes the political process has a hard time keeping up. So perhaps things that changes like a minimum wage that's pegged to something could keep you from having to go back and redo it all the time.
Absolutely agree. I think it's a critical step too to protect basic workers' rights. And again, if the point of the American dream is if you work hard, you can succeed. Well, if you work hard at minimum wage right now, you can't. And that's not what America should be doing. It's not what the Commonwealth should be doing. A hard day's work should get you enough to survive, enough to live on, enough to raise a family in a, at least moderately decent way to live. It's an important thing we can do for one another. And, protecting those collective bargaining rights is critical as well. I know firsthand, I've, while I was in my PhD program, I also served as an adjunct professor. And I've seen firsthand the value that a union can have, because I didn't have one. And I know that there are things that we would have liked addressed that we couldn't.
Adjunct professors, I hear, often aren't paid as well as they really should be, and are lacking in certain other protections as well.
Absolutely, we don't get really any protection. We can be, semester to semester work. There's no guarantee of further employment, which is fine. I understand that part, but we get paid very little, a fraction of what they pay. And that's why institutions use them.
That's why they use them.
I understand. I don't blame them in that sense, but we deserve better protection. If you think of all the training that adjunct professors have gone through to be paid what they're paid is unreasonable. And without any collective bargaining power, without the ability to push back and say, we deserve too to that living wage, well, we don't get it. And so I've seen firsthand the important role that unions, sort of collective bargaining, can play.
We seem to be, at the moment, at least in some parts of the country, among some folks, in an anti-union point. And I think sometimes even now, sort of middle-class folks are critical of unions and would have benefited from them themselves at one point. So it's a difficult position to be in.
It is, and of course there are unions that go too far. There's, of course, some that are corrupt, some that make unreasonable demands. That certainly happens, and I understand why people are upset with unions that do that, but the problem is it paints all unions with sort of this same broad stroke that doesn't really apply. Most unions really are, they're small scale, they are trying to help, they are trying to do their part, and I understand there's this pushback on unions as a special interest, but everything is a special interest. And it's unfortunate to me. I think a lot of people have fallen into the idea that unions are bad, but when in reality, unions are critical to this system, and I don't feel ashamed to say that, and I'm willing to stand by that quite gladly. I think they're critical to this process. We just have to rein in some of the excess when some unions go too far.
Right, reasonable. Anything else that you'd like to concentrate on or put some energy into on the state level?
Absolutely. Another one would be the environment. I mean, we were talking before, no point in any of this if you can't have anywhere to live. Right. So I think it's critical.
And Boston itself may be underwater in a few decades if nothing changes, which would make... Actually, you might be okay in the State House because it's on a hill.
That's true.
But it would make your job very hard. So
it would. I don't want to have to take a boat to get to work. Yeah, if I were to win this. Yeah.
So the environment is one.
Yes. So I know Massachusetts is not big. It's a small state, but we can still do our part. And to my mind, for example, even take solar paneling. So our house has solar paneling. It was free. I would have loved to have had it either way, but there's no possible way we could have afforded to put it on. And we used a sort of combination of federal government rebates and gifts and the state government programs to do it. And the state programs and federal programs we used aren't there anymore. And
I've understand that some of them have ended.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly why, but I'd like to see them come back. I think encouraging people and helping them afford solar paneling is a great step. It's a great way to reduce the carbon footprint, as the expression goes. And I think that is an important thing to do. And it's a great way for individuals to give back with that state help as well.
Right.
And I think if we could negotiate ways and figure out how to make it easier for local communities to have their own utilities, like as Belmont does, for example, then using, again, back to collective bargaining.
Belmont has its own utilities?
Yes, has its own utility set and works very well. And if we could create this broader collective bargaining power, in essence, also for municipalities to really be able to set better rates and to demand that a higher percentage of the energy provided come from renewable sources. And that's a powerful move that the state could take in easing the regulatory burdens in that regard.
In fact, Lexington recently made a switch to where most Eversource customers are now on a 100% renewable plan.
Yes.
And that could happen in even more cities and towns.
Exactly, and I think the state can play a role in encouraging that. And I think that'd be great as a way to go. And I think related to it is transportation. It's sort of its own area, but it's directly related to the environment as well. And part of my platform is sort of twofold there. One is to look at bike lanes. So the number of people biking has increased, which is good. I don't personally bike, I just fall over, but for those who do bike, I'm glad to see it. And it's good, by the way, if we can improve those bike lanes, if we can make them safer. In Boston, they've taken a situation where it was quite dangerous to bike, and they've done things like parked cars now sit in the road. So there's now the road, the parked cars, and then the bike lane that make it much safer for the bikers to be able to get around. And that's something other communities can do. It won't work on every road. Some roads will always be more dangerous to bike on than others.
Right.
But there are a lot of state roads. The state can play a direct role there in improving safety. And it can offer services, consultation, perhaps funding, infrastructure programs and the like to help local communities too improve bike lane and bike safety. And in doing so, the hope then is more people will bike. Worst case scenario, no one more bikes, but it's just safer, and that's good for everybody.
Right.
But if more people bike, that's a win for public health. It's a great way to stay in shape, so that's a big plus. So it's a win for the environment, fewer cars on the road, and it's frankly a win for the people in the cars because fewer cars on the road, less congestion. That's a big plus. But I think also related to that is things like the MBTA and the regional transit authorities. So I know the MBTA is obviously in massive debt, and service is not always great. These are major problems because it discourages people from using it. And in fairness to the MBTA, to be fair on both sides, it's been horribly mismanaged. But not all that debt is its own. Most of it is big dig debt that had nothing to do with the MBTA. So I'm not sure how that got hooked up to it. It's an interesting question. However it did is unfair to the MBTA.
Yeah.
But the proposals to address this make no particular sense. Most of them are to save costs, to pay down the debt. So reduce service, raise prices. I mean, I may not be an economist, but that sounds like the worst business model you could possibly imagine. Make your product worse, make it cost more. I think
good point.
Yeah, I think instead
that will only work where there's no competition.
That's true.
Which is the case with the with the T. But anyway.
True, but it only works too if there really is no competition. Because if you can drive, well,
that's the competition.
That's the competition, or you can bike. Even though that is still your competition.
And Uber.
And Uber, and all that stuff is rising as competition. So, to my mind, instead, what we need to do is an initial outlay of additional funds. And actually, this goes back again to that fair share amendment, where some of that money is also earmarked for transportation. So we should actually increase the level of service. We should make it easier to using more bus lines. I know there are people in Lexington who would really like to use the bus to get to work,
Yeah.
but they're not near a bus line. So, and that's not unique to Lexington or to Woburn or to any of the surrounding communities. It's across any area that regional transit and then the MBTA service. So we should spend more money on these programs initially. I'm not going to say that'll make it, again, necessarily cost neutral, but more people riding it in and of itself will be a win for the environment and will lead to more revenue in the long run. And really, it's just basic fairness again. There are many people who have to rely on these services, and if
Right.
it's our responsibility to help, families who need to get their children to daycare and rely on the T, or get to work and get home in time to take care of children. It's our responsibility to make sure that they can do so. And so I'd like to see an expansion of MBTA service, of regional transit authority service. And then we can, hopefully, that raises revenue, and we'll deal with the debt as that time comes. So,
Yeah, that all makes perfect sense to me. You'll have certain people calling you a socialist, but that's going to happen either way.
fair enough. No, I'm not sure that's how I'd call myself, but yeah.
No, I wouldn't either.
I can live with it. Yeah.
I wouldn't either. But
I believe in doing what's right no matter what someone calls you.
No, I do too, and I think throwing a socialist label around is basically just a scare tactic that's used in today's politics.
I agree, sadly. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are people who philosophically are dead set against things like public transit because they think that it's not private property, so it's not American.
Yeah.
It's odd to me.
Yeah, I agree. It's certainly not the ideology I follow. And and with people like that, sometimes you just agree to disagree and just be respectful. And I think that's lacking across far too much of politics. It's just basic, respectful conversation. Because someone disagrees with you doesn't make them un-American. It doesn't make them your enemy. And I think that's the bigger problem far more at the federal level than the state. But you see it seep in here. Most of us are really just on both sides trying to do what we think is right and trying to make things better. We just don't always agree. So I won't change my position, but I can still respect you if you disagree with me. So yeah.
You mentioned the federal level. If you were elected and became our state rep, down the road, would you have any thoughts of doing anything on the federal level, federal politics?
Got to win this one first, is my honest answer.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm a long way from thinking about that, but I mean, it is something, of course, that crosses one's mind. I won't lie in that regard. It is something I have thought about. My children have already mapped out my career path, and it includes going to the next level. I told them to slow down a bit. Let's focus on this one first. So yeah. So I'd want to focus here, see if I can win, and I believe I can. And then if I do, I can certainly reevaluate where I'd like to go from there. But right now we have a lot of excellent representation, and I don't envision challenging any of them. So yeah, but maybe the governor. Yeah.
Right. Forgive my cluelessness, but when will the election be?
So the primary election is September 4th.
Okay.
And then the general is on the general election day.
Sure.
Yeah. Right now, focus is definitely on September 4th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you'll be a busy man between now and then.
Absolutely. A lot of work to do in between them, but I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And it's been fun. I've met hundreds of people, and it's been fun to hear from them. Important to hear, really, from what they believe. One of the most important things I want to do is listen. I think you can't represent if you don't listen to what people have to say. I don't want to just be the one always talking. I want to hear from you. Every door I go to, I ask, what's on your mind? What are your top issues? And here's who I am. Here's my general belief and framework. But what matters to you? And that's really what I want to hear from everybody is, what's on your mind? That's the key to me in all of this.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much,
Matthew Cohen. Best of luck with
you.
Everything you're doing, and I hope things go well.
Thank you, and I hope as people watch this that they'll be interested and reach out to the campaign. And that's we do have a website. It's www.cohenforstaterep.com. steveiverson.com.
Okay.
And I'm always happy to talk with anyone who wants to even just talk. Even if they just want to argue with me.
Okay.
I'm always happy to talk, so find that time.
Fair enough. So people could look at the website and see email addresses and phone numbers. And
Absolutely.
get in touch if they'd like to.
Definitely.
All right. Well,
Wonderful.
thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet.